The Strength and Softness, Breaking Generational Cycles of Trauma. Welcome to a conversation that might just change your life. I recently had the extraordinary privilege of interviewing Lakeisha Travis, a revolutionary force in mental health advocacy within Black communities. Her work isn't just groundbreaking, it's life saving. With unwavering courage and profound wisdom, Lakeisha has created spaces where healing isn't just possible, but prioritized, especially for those who've been taught that strength means silence. Her insights have transformed how we understand the delicate intersection between childhood trauma and adult resilience, creating ripples of healing that extend far beyond individual therapy rooms into entire communities. Have you ever had one of those moments? You know the ones I'm talking about. You're standing in your kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at your impressive resume, magnetized to the refrigerator, thinking about your thriving career, scrolling through that carefully curated Instagram feed, and yet somehow, inexplicably, you feel like you're barely holding it together. That strange disconnect where success on paper doesn't translate to peace in your spirit. Huh, that gap isn't random and it's definitely not just you. For many high achieving individuals, particularly Black women, that chasm between external success and internal struggle often traces back to something we rarely discuss in professional settings: childhood trauma. Now, before you mentally check out thinking, this doesn't apply to me, my childhood wasn't that bad, let me stop you right there. Trauma isn't just about the obviously catastrophic. Sometimes it's in the quiet expectations, the unspoken rules, the subtle message that your feelings weren't as important as keeping the peace. As Lakeisha Travis explained during our conversation, trauma doesn't always announce itself with sirens. Sometimes it whispers through generations, teaching us that strength means silence. Let me tell you about Maya. At 35, Maya was exactly where society told her she should want to be: leadership position at a prestigious tech firm, financially secure, respected by colleagues. From the outside, she was crushing it. But inside, Maya was drowning: persistent anxiety, difficulty forming close relationships, a constant feeling that she needed to be on all the time, high functioning depression that she hid behind perfect PowerPoint presentations and strategic smiles. What Maya didn't realize until therapy finally became unavoidable was that her present struggles weren't character flaws. They were echoes of childhood emotional neglect. Growing up, she was always expected to be the strong one for her family. While other children were learning to express emotions, Maya was learning to suppress them. "We don't have time for feelings," her household silently communicated. Survival was the priority. Emotions were luxury items they couldn't afford. Sound familiar to anyone? This pattern isn't random. Research shows us a direct line between what psychologists call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and adult mental health outcomes. A national survey examining these connections found that participants with higher ACE scores faced significantly increased rates of depression, anxiety, perceived stress, defeat, and feelings of entrapment, even after controlling for age and gender differences. But here's where Lakeisha's insights become particularly powerful. These patterns hit differently in communities where historical trauma compounds personal experiences. For Black women, especially, the expectation to be strong isn't just familial, it's cultural, historical, sometimes even spiritual. The strong Black woman trope isn't just a stereotype. For many, it's been a survival strategy passed down through generations. As Maya began therapy with a culturally competent provider who understood these nuances, something remarkable happened. She started recognizing that her anxiety wasn't weakness, it was her body's natural response to years of emotional suppression. Her difficulty with vulnerability wasn't a personal failing, it was a protective mechanism she developed in a household where emotional needs were minimized. This recognition became the first step toward real change. Through trauma informed care and community support groups specifically tailored for Black professionals, Maya learned healthy coping strategies, setting boundaries at work and home, allowing herself moments of vulnerability, and most importantly, questioning the belief that strength meant silence about pain. The transformation wasn't just personal. Maya became an advocate within her company's DEI initiatives, launching workshops on mental health destigmatization that specifically address cultural expectations around strength in Black communities. Her openness inspired policy changes around employee wellness days and created ripple effects across her industry. One person's healing journey became a catalyst for systemic change. But Maya's story isn't unique. Let me share another powerful example that Lakeisha highlighted in our conversation. An African American entrepreneur, I'll call him Marcus, built a successful business from the ground up. He was known in his community as the reliable provider, the man who never showed weakness, who could be counted on when everything else fell apart. What people didn't see were the panic attacks that would leave him gasping for air in his car before important meetings, the way he'd isolate from loved ones whenever emotions ran high, the chronic exhaustion from overworking himself to the point where feelings couldn't break through. It wasn't until his marriage and business were both at risk that Marcus finally sought help. What he discovered shook him to his core. His lifelong battle with panic attacks was tied directly back to growing up amid domestic violence, a truth he'd long buried beneath his public persona. With guidance from therapists trained specifically on racial and cultural nuances surrounding vulnerability, challenging the Black men don't cry narrative, Marcus began practicing mindfulness techniques alongside talk therapy sessions focused on reprocessing traumatic memories safely. Crucially, he also joined peer led circles where successful Black men could share openly about their struggles without stigma, a safe space rarely found elsewhere. The results were transformative. His panic attacks lessened dramatically. He rebuilt strained relationships by learning it was okay not only to feel, but to express those feelings out loud, even as someone others depended upon daily. Today, Marcus mentors other young entrepreneurs facing similar pressures, shifting culture by modeling authentic leadership rooted not just in grit, but genuine self awareness and emotional honesty. These stories matter because they challenge a dangerous myth that being the strong one somehow makes you immune to struggle, that vulnerability is weakness, that silence equals strength. As Lakeisha Travis powerfully articulated, true resilience isn't about never breaking, it's about learning how to put yourself back together and sometimes letting others help with the pieces. This is where early intervention becomes so crucial. That national survey I mentioned earlier highlighted the importance of programs within schools, churches, and community centers that teach emotional regulation skills from a young age, especially in underserved neighborhoods disproportionately affected by systemic inequities. Communities implementing these programs saw measurable decreases in crisis incidents among young adults. Participants reported feeling more empowered to seek help when struggling emotionally later in life. What made these programs particularly effective? They were developed in collaboration with grassroots organizations led by Black women therapists who understood both clinical practice and lived experience. Their insights shaped culturally responsive interventions that resonated deeply with participants' realities. This research influenced national policy discussions about funding preventive services targeting minority youth exposed to chronic adversity, not just treating symptoms, but addressing root causes holistically. It underscored the urgent need for intersectional approaches when tackling intergenerational trauma within marginalized communities. But here's the thing about healing: it doesn't just happen in therapy offices or research studies. It happens in moments of quiet courage when we choose a different path than the one modeled for us. It happens when we pause during a stressful workday to check in with our bodies instead of pushing through. It happens when we say, I'm struggling right now, instead of I'm fine for the thousandth time. It happens when we set a boundary with family members who expect us to carry emotional loads that were never ours to bear. As Lakeisha reminds us, healing isn't linear and it isn't quiet. Sometimes it's messy and loud and uncomfortable, but it's always, always worth it. So here's my challenge to you today. Inspired directly by Lakeisha Travis's transformative work, I challenge you to examine the stories you tell yourself about strength, to question whether what you've labeled as weakness might actually be your humanity begging to be acknowledged. I challenge you to recognize that the weight you're carrying wasn't meant to be carried alone, and that setting it down doesn't make you less capable, it makes you more whole. I challenge you to consider that the most revolutionary act might not be pushing through pain, but pausing to honor it. Because when we heal ourselves, we don't just transform our own lives, we interrupt generational patterns. We create new possibilities for everyone who comes after us. We rewrite narratives that have kept too many people silent for too long. This isn't just personal work, this is cultural revolution happening one brave conversation, one boundary, one moment of vulnerability at a time. So today, I invite you, no, I implore you to join me in this revolution of softness, to embrace a definition of strength that includes rest, vulnerability, and healing, to recognize that your scars aren't signs of weakness, but maps of where you've been, and they need not determine where you're going. The world doesn't need more people who are broken in the name of being strong. It needs people who are whole, who have looked their trauma in the eye and said, You shaped me, but you don't define me. That journey begins with a single courageous step, acknowledging that beneath the armor you've built, there's a human being worthy of tenderness, worthy of rest, worthy of healing. And in that acknowledgement lies your greatest power. Thank you.